This is probably one of the best investments out there because in the last 2 months, it has grown by over 300%. I mean, imagine it takes you like 5 or 7 years to save your first $100,000. And in less than 3 months, in less than 2 months, I would say, you can actually not just double that money, but triple that money. And I'm talking about an investment like Dogecoin. Now, this is not really a serious investment, but the fact that it has actually grown by over 300% in such a short period of time tells you a lot that there's so many opportunities out there. Now, the first time that this coin has grown substantially was when Elon Musk promoted it for the first time on his account on X.com like 2 years ago or something like that. But now, because President Trump has won the election and his closest advisor is Elon Musk, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and every other crypto out there is actually substantially growing. Because if I'm not mistaken, back in the day, Elon Musk was so serious about Dogecoin that he actually started accepting Dogecoin as a form of currency in order to buy Teslas. And this is mind-blowing, because just think about that for a moment. Like if you are making $100,000, now that's not really a lot of money, but it's actually much more than the average income in the United States. And let's say you live in a place like New York or California. Best case scenario, you can save 20% of your income. And even in that case, it takes you like 5 years to save $100,000. And in such a short period of time, by making one good investment, you can save yourself years of your life. You can turn that $100,000 into $300,000, $400,000. And you don't have to save that much money for the next not just 5 years, for the next 15 years of your life. And that is the power of investing when you know what exactly are you doing. And this is just one example because Trump hasn't become the president yet. When he becomes the president starting from January and Elon Musk is advisor, with all the projects that they're doing, a lot more opportunities are going to come. And I'm not just talking about Tesla. I'm not talking about the companies that are directly associated with Elon Musk or President Trump. I'm talking about the economy overall. Because one of the things that they're planning to do is that they're trying to create Department of Government Efficiency. And at the head of this department is going to be Elon Musk. And his job, and if you know anything about Elon Musk, his entire career, his entire professional entrepreneurship career was all about cutting costs. The reason that SpaceX succeeded is because they took what NASA is doing and they started thinking about how can they potentially cut costs and make rockets more affordable. The reason that Tesla succeeded because Elon Musk was so great at cutting costs. And this is probably the first successful auto car company in the history of the United States in the last 100 years or so. And him being at the head of this department and cutting costs in the US government is probably going to entirely restructure the entire US economy. And when any kind of major change happens, whether it's in the US economy or globally or anywhere, what do you think is going to happen? There are going to be a lot of losers and a lot of winners. Exactly what happened in 2020. Now, a lot of people might say that I wasn't really ready for the opportunities that came up in 2020. Well, I can't really blame you. But right now we don't have an excuse because we might be on the brink of something similar that's about to happen in the next 4 years. And I'm going to explain exactly how Elon Musk plans to change the entire government in order for you to realize where are the opportunities. So if you're good at understanding how the stock market works and analyzing stocks, you can pick up those stocks and instead of actually spending the next 20 years of your life saving 20% of your income, you can take the money that you have right now and not just triple it, but grow it by 10 times if you actually know what exactly is going on and how to invest properly. Now, the biggest problem that the US government is actually facing at this point and has been facing for the last 20 years is the fact that it is actually spending way more money than it's actually creating. So the revenue of the government primarily comes from taxes, and then it actually spends on different kind of infrastructure projects, the defense, the healthcare, and everything else. Now, the problem with it is that the United States is in a serious trouble and is heading into bankruptcy, as Elon Musk calls it. So there is two ways to essentially solve this problem. Now, one way is, of course, to grow your income or grow your revenue. So you can take a second job, for example, if you are talking about you individually. But when you're talking about the government, the only way for the government to actually increase its revenue is by either raising taxes. That's not something that is popular, and that's not something that Republicans and especially Donald Trump wants to do. Now, the second thing you can do is to just grow the economy. So when the pie grows up, even if you take the exact same tax percentage, you're making more money. Now, expecting that the US government is going to, and the US economy is going to grow faster than 2% annually is entirely foolish, because according to if you take a look at all the developed countries out there, none of them grows by more than 2.5% annually. And even 2% is pretty optimistic, to be honest, especially if you compare it to a country like the United Kingdom that is not growing by any percent at all. It probably barely grows by like 0.5% or 0.2%. So 2% growth for the United States is really great. But that kind of growth is not really enough for the government to balance its books. So the only way that we can do right now is to actually lower down spending, is to spend less money. And that is the job of Elon Musk. Now, of course, he can do that by reducing the size of the government, reducing regulations so that the economy grows faster and less people work in the government. And one of the consequences of that decision is obviously a lot of people are going to get fired. So the first losers of Elon Musk being at the head of this department, or the creation of this department in the first place, is that if you work for the government, you will most likely get fired in the foreseeable future. So don't be actually surprised. Now, another thing could happen is that the financial industry is going to boom, or the financial companies. Here I'm talking about banks, I'm talking about different kind of financial, I'm talking about Wall Street in general probably, and also crypto. Because what happened after 2008 financial crisis is that the US government imposed a lot of regulations in order to make it difficult, or not difficult, in order for the 2008 financial crisis to not ever repeat again. And that meant is that regulations kept growing and growing and growing. Of course, that is not going to happen again, but at the same time, now it's much more difficult to get into the financial industry. So by taking out regulations from the financial industry, a lot of those fintech companies, a lot of those banks, a lot of those financial institutions will suddenly start growing. And that also includes crypto. So crypto is most likely Bitcoin is most likely going to cross $100,000 when Trump becomes president. And I wouldn't actually be surprised that within the next 4 years, Bitcoin is going to cross $150,000. Honestly, I'm really surprised because I'm not really a big fan of crypto overall. Not like a big fan of crypto, but it's very difficult to value crypto. But given the fact that it's already crossed $93,000, I wouldn't be surprised if it's gonna keep going on to 150 within the next 4 years. As of 2024, the government spends around $6.8 trillion. Now, that is a lot of money because nobody on the face of the earth spends as much as the US government. And where that money goes to, it goes to a lot of different departments, but the three major departments that takes most of that money, if we don't actually include the fact that a portion of that money goes into paying the US national debt, is the Social Security, where $1.3 trillion goes into. Then we have, of course, the healthcare, where $1.7 trillion goes to. And then, of course, Defense Department. If Elon Musk wants to reduce the size of the government and reduce government spending, most likely those changes are going to be around these three departments, because these are huge departments that are spending trillions of dollars overall. So if you can actually reduce them by 20% each of them, for example, then you can actually say that the government will at least save $1.5 trillion. Maybe slightly more, maybe slightly less. But if the government will decrease its cost by its spending by $1.5 trillion, at the same time slightly increase the revenue, to a certain extent, it's very possible that they will balance the books within the next 4 years. Now, first of all, Social Security. Now, the entire point of Social Security is to make sure that people who are retiring today have some money to actually spend on themselves. Because the point of the Social Security is that you are working and paying taxes to make sure that the people who are retiring today have some source of revenue when they cannot actually work and they have been retired. Now, that system works when you have more working people on one side and you have less retired people on the other side. So the system worked for decades. The problem happened is that the birth rate in the United States started going down. And that means that now we have less working people. Now, the only way to actually replace them is, of course, through immigration, but immigration creates a lot different problems as well. On the other hand, for the last 50 years, the average life expectancy in the United States and around the globe generally has been growing. So those people are no longer living, for example, 70 years. They're living like 80 years, 90 years. So we have to sustain them for a longer period of time. And now we have less people working and more people retiring. So the system is actually about to collapse. And that's why if you right now go and Google, you will find out that Social Security is heading for bankruptcy and something fundamental should be changed. Now, the biggest problem with the Social Security is that that money actually is being taken into a fund, and that fund primarily invests in treasury bills. Treasury bills are the government bonds that are being issued by the government of the United States. And these are the safest investments out there. And the reason they do that is because they want to play around with people's social securities. That is not something you play around, right? But government bonds primarily pay a much lower interest rate than, for example, the stock market, than the S&P 500. So the system is not sustainable. One of the things that the Social Security can do is that they can take that money and invest it in another safe investment, for example, such as the S&P 500. Of course, I'm guessing to a certain extent, but there's a really possibility that if we want to restructure the entire Social Security, why not take that portion of that money, not all of that money, and part of it should be invested, for example, the S&P 500. Not individual stocks, not stocks that are risky, but the S&P 500 that we know that historically has actually got us around 8 to 9% or even 10% annually. Yes, some of those years are going to get negative, but there are funds or government funds that are investing in the S&P 500 and the stock market. For example, the largest pension fund that exists in Norway, and that pension fund mostly invests in the stock market, including the S&P 500. So if the Social Security suddenly will be restructured in such a way where 50% or 40% of its funds are going to be invested in the S&P 500, what do you think is going to happen to the stocks to the S&P 500 overall? Of course, it is going to grow substantially. So we are talking about Fidelity, Vanguard, and other financial institutions that invest in the S&P 500. We are talking about the top largest companies that make up part of the S&P 500. These are the stable companies that have been part of the S&P 500 for a very, very long time. So these are probably the biggest beneficiaries of restructuring the Social Security. Now, the chances of this happening is very low. I am not telling you that this is exactly what is going to happen, but I think this is a possibility because if you want to actually lower down Social Security to a certain extent, then you have to take an alternative way because you can't just be buying government bonds and expecting from government bonds to pay you like 6 or 7%. That's not going to happen. Now, another source of spending or expenditure for the US government is, of course, healthcare, where it spends $1.7 trillion. Now, this is a lot of money. And considering the fact that healthcare in the United States for most people is not really great. Now, if you have money, nobody really complains about that because you can just go to the best hospitals, you can buy whatever you want, you have the best doctors out there. But for most people, the way that the healthcare works in the United States is very different, for example, than it works in Europe. Because in the United States, it's delegated by the government to private corporations to take care of that. So when the government actually spends on healthcare, they take your money and they pay to insurance companies such as United Health Group. United Health Group is an insurance company that will take your money and will go to hospitals, physicians, prescription drugs companies, and so on and so forth, and negotiate with them how much it will pay it so that you will have your insurance, for example. And that's how the system basically works. What the government can do is that they can go to first of all, they can actually change the laws so that prescription drugs companies will have more competition from outside. They will have more competition by changing the rules and the laws of the game. The problem right now is that, for example, if there is a company that is selling a drug in the United States, and there is a cheaper alternative in a different countries such as Canada or Europe or anywhere else in the world, they cannot simply come to the United States and offer their product for a cheaper price because of the rules and the regulations we have in the United States. And that is why that's something that could be changed. Suddenly, if those drugs are being sold at a cheaper price outside, they can bring them to the United States, and those companies in the United States will have to lower down their prices in order to compete. Now, you might say that, why didn't the government do that in the past? Because those prescription drugs companies, for example, are actually spending millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars every single year on lobbying in government in order to make sure that the laws and the rules stay the same. And that is why those healthcare companies do not have a lot of negotiation powers when it comes to actually negotiating a better drug prices, for example, for your insurance. Now, another thing that they can do is that they can just simply go to the insurance companies and tell them, listen guys, we're not really happy with your prices. Here's what we're going to do is that you're either going to give us a better deal, or we as a government going to award government contracts to a different insurance company, for example. So United Health Group will have to offer the government a much better deal so that they don't really go to an alternative one that is a competitor of the United Health Group. And that means that a lot of insurance companies could actually take government contracts besides United Health Group, and that's why their stocks in the market are going to rise substantially. The third place where Elon Musk can actually cut a lot of costs is definitely the Defense Department, the military-industrial complex, where around $900 billion is being spent annually. Now, the problem with this department is that for the 7th year in a row, Pentagon fails to actually pass the audit. Do you know what that means? That even Pentagon itself has no idea where that money is going to go to. Like literally, imagine spending like $900 billion and you have no idea where that money is going to. That means that someone out there is making a lot of money. That means that there is a lot of waste in Pentagon, and a lot of that money could actually be reduced substantially. Now, if you take a look at the whole budget of Pentagon, around 25% of that money goes into salaries. So that's around $200 billion. All right, $200 billion goes to salaries. There is certainly a certain amount of money that is going to maintenance and so on and so forth. But most of the things that are purchased, most of the military equipment, most of the R&D, most of the other expenses that is being actually made by the Defense Department isn't actually made directly by them. They award government contracts to the military-industrial complex to companies such as, for example, Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and they're the ones who are doing all the work. And if you know anything about those companies are extremely ineffective at spending money. What SpaceX is literally offering something that the exact same thing that Boeing is offering, but at a fraction of the price. So I wouldn't be actually surprised if after looking into that, but after Elon Musk looks into that, he will realize that we can cut like 50% of those expenses the first year in the administration. So the government simply can say that, listen, we are not going to pay more than an X amount of money for this kind of technology, for example. And if you, Lockheed Martin, cannot possibly do that, or you, Boeing, cannot do that, we're going to award that contract to someone else. Now, logically, in a free market, there should be competition. But right now, there is no competition because there are like 4 or 5 companies that are taking most of the money from the defense budget, such as Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and a couple of others. So if government can actually create more competition within the defense industry, then I guess that budget could actually be reduced substantially. And that's why if you actually pay attention, those defense companies such as Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and others are actually spending like tens of millions of dollars. Just in the first half of 2023, they spent like $70 million on lobbying. Why would you spend so much money on lobbying? And that's because if you don't spend that much money, you're not going to get the government contract, and you will not be able to make tens of billions of dollars out of taxpayers. Trump has always said that he's against wars and he wants to stop all the wars out there. And if you know anything about the United States since World War II, you know that the United States has always been in a state of war. So the United States doesn't really have any kind of specific objectives. Like when you start a war and you have like specific goals and you allocate a specific budget to that war, then you start the war, you achieve the objectives, and you end the war. But that's not something that the military-industrial complex wants you to do. They want you to be in a constant state of war. So when you're in a constant state of war, when you get into a country, for example, and you stay there for the next 20 years or 30 years, you keep buying the equipments from Lockheed Martin. You keep buying equipments from Boeing. You keep buying equipments from so-and-so. So if the United States can literally change it the way it actually plays its game, then all that money can actually be saved, and the government can actually save a lot of money over there as well. So if you actually take a look, by restructuring the entire government spending out there, we will have a lot of other companies who will grow by 100%, 200%, probably 1,000%, because there are going to be some fundamental changes out there. Now, I'm not saying that these changes will certainly happen. Of course, this is first of all in theory, but if you know anything about Elon Musk, the fact that he has accomplished so much, the fact that he has built so many successful businesses, the fact that he's so good at cutting costs, I'm not really sure how much authority Trump is going to give him, but if he will have all the power to do that, and he actually even achieves, let's say, half of what we actually talked in this video, then there are going to be a lot of other companies that are going to shoot substantially. They will go to the moon, as they say in the meme. But here's the important thing that I want you to keep in mind is that do not buy or do not invest in stocks that you see are being hyped in the moment. For example, when Trump won the presidency, instantly Dogecoin rose. That is not the time to buy it because everybody is buying it. Or for example, Tesla stock instantly jumped. You should not buy that particular moment. You have to wait until things calm down, until people slightly forget about it, and the valuations will come down, and that's when you buy. So if you want to make a good investment, you should know what's going on. You should know when exactly what's going on with this company and what are the factors that will drive the stock price higher. And in order to do that, you have to be knowledgeable. You have to understand how the market works. You have to understand how the system works. So the next 4 years are going to be extremely wild, and you have to prepare yourself. You have to get ready. You have to know what's going on. You need the right tools, the right investment strategies right in front of you. And if you need help with that, check out the first link in the description. Other than that, thanks guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.